Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the webinar where Elizabeth will be speaking about the roadmap of Freeman. Thank you so much for joining. Elizabeth, thank you so much to you. It's really a pleasure to have you here today to get to know a little bit more of the insights, how you guys have developed the roadmap. As you know, the roadmap is quite an important part of the pledge of net zero carbon events. And we, as a matter of fact, know that some of the stakeholders struggle to start with this because there is, of course, no benchmark or whatsoever. So this is why we have started this webinar series in order to run this educational program in order to really showcase how some of the stakeholders are doing and designing their processes in terms of development of these webinars. We already had last month the pleasure of welcoming Helen Shepard from RX, and she's here today as well. Helen, thank you so much once again for being the first one. Really very much appreciated. And well, today, Elizabeth from Freeman, as I said, we are also doing already some other planning for the future. So Scottish Events Campus will be doing a webinar pretty soon as well. So we will send some more information about this in the coming weeks. Just so that you know, this webinar is recorded and then we will put it online. So the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative has its own YouTube channel, and most probably tomorrow you will find this webinar already online there in case you want to disseminate it to some other colleagues. We suggest that Elizabeth will run through the presentation, and then afterwards, if you have any questions, well, I'm pretty sure Elizabeth will be happy to answer them. And I suggest that we start. Elizabeth, thank you so much again for joining this webinar and for your readiness to be part of it. Looking very much forward to what Freeman has done and how Freeman has done it. And yeah, the floor is yours. So very welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you all are. Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
Fantastic, fantastic. As Alex mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Pratheim. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at Freeman. We are one of the largest general contractors and agencies for live events and are a founding signatory of the Net Zero Carbon Events. I saw Helen was on here, and I was going to say thank you to Helen as well for being the first one to come on and do a webinar. And it was funny. So when Alex first asked me about doing this, a quote first came to mind, and it was, "Don't let perfect get in the way of good." And Helen had a quote similar to that, and so I wanted to go off on a slightly different tangent. And the other one that came up is, I don't know if any of you have seen this movie called The 12 Angry Men, but they have a scene in there where they talk about a jury that is, well, I guess basically a court case. And so the quote is, nobody can know a thing like that. This isn't an exact science, and that's right, it isn't. And I think sometimes, we really want to make this an exact science, but it's just not. And so, going back to that, don't let perfect get in the way of good. A lot of this is really just getting on the path and, starting and knowing that it's going to, you're going to continue to work on the roadmap. You're going to continue to refine it. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But so a lot of this, as we started to look at it, certainly overwhelming at first. And especially when you're going to be publishing it, that brings another level of stress and concern and things like that to it. So there were a lot of conversations internally, and we'll kind of talk about that process as well as we go through here. So the number one thing I would say is and I know probably all of you that are on are, sorry, was there a question? Or maybe not. Okay, so all of you are probably at least signatories of the net zero carbon events. And I think Helen mentioned this on her presentation as well. I would say absolutely, join NZCE, be a part of this. This is a really ambitious journey for us all to be on, and the power of us working together, the power of that collaboration, the power of working towards standards that we can all measure against, the power of bringing the scale of what we're trying to do to the events is, I would say, not just critical, but necessary, right? It's something that we all need to come together and be working towards the same purpose so that we can give all of our suppliers the same message. We can give all of our attendees, our exhibitors, etc., that we can really leverage all of that to move us towards our goal. So if you haven't joined the effort yet, don't let the reporting scare you off, because it really is important. If you have these goals, that reporting, even if you're just doing it internally, to understand your impacts, I think it's so important to do that. So please do join us at the NCC, especially if you're in North America. Not to give my North American colleagues a poke, but we really do need more North American representation as we move forward. So again, please do join. So as we went through this as a company, the biggest part of this is obviously you know what your company does and the different parts of it, but we found it really beneficial to kind of dig in and look at each part of that event life cycle of what we do and what we do in each piece of that. So what are we doing within the planning and design portion? What happens when we're moving into an event? What happens during the event, at the end of an event, and then kind of post? And through all of that, what's happening within our own operations, because we have a lot of offices, we have warehouses, we have equipment that's outside or behind the scenes that's also constantly running, but still a part of our footprint. So really digging into each piece of those and looking at who's involved, what types of equipment are we using, what types of materials, different things, to make sure that we really understood, where our impacts were within that. So as we look, but then we went through, and as we looked at it, sometimes I think there's a lot of gut feel to this, but there's also a lot of science to it. So it's that science and art piece where it comes together, right? Again, this is not an exact science. So we did work with an outside consultant to help us measure our GHG inventory so that we could really understand where our impacts were. We did look at it across all three scopes, and not surprisingly, and I'm sure for many of you that have also done an inventory, as a service oriented company, the large majority of our emissions is in scope 3. And that, as most of you know, is the most difficult one to impact because it's out of your direct control. And so as we looked at it, the largest portion of our footprint was in purchased goods. So if you think about all of the things that we're purchasing around carpets and graphics and furniture and things like that, that's a big piece of our footprint. And then secondly is all of the transportation. So whether it's internally what we do or third party, where we are, transporting, carpet, we're transporting exhibits, we're transporting furniture, all of those things that are coming coming to the event. So it was really important for us to make sure that we knew, again, where our impacts were so that we could start to build that roadmap. Now, we'll talk a little bit in a bit how not to get overwhelmed by all of that and how to dig in, and that it is important to know where your impacts are, but it's also important to know where your influence is. And so how do you kind of go through a process so you don't get overwhelmed by it, because we're all short on resources, we're all short on budget. So making sure that you can prioritize and kind of have a systematic way of doing that is going to be really, really important to this process. So as we looked down, we again, and maybe I like to simplify things before I overcomplicate them, which I can tend to do. And so as we looked at all of our impacts, I would say that the two biggest ones in simplifying it was energy and materials. And when I think about materials, I'm thinking about the entire life cycle of those materials, right? What are they made of through what happens at, we call it end of event. We want to see where it goes end of event, and hopefully that's not end of life, but it is definitely something that we look at across the life cycle of all of those impacts. And so we talked a lot about how transportation is a big piece of our footprint. So really looking at all of the fuels that we use, and that includes both on and off-road vehicles. So again, we talk about how we transport things, but all of you have been at shows, and so you see all the forklifts and material handling equipment running around. That's also included in our fuels, and looking at what we can do there. The electricity, we have a lot of, as I mentioned, offices and warehouses and things like that. And then the materials, we talk about the carpet, we talk about the booth structures, we talk about all of the graphics and signage and audio visual and things that we use, and what happens to those after the event. And this is where that piece, looking at collaboration, and this is maybe going, outside of the roadmap, but and how you start to impact things. A lot of what we can do at the end of an event will be in collaboration with those venues, right? And ensuring that we have the time to do what we need to do, and ensure that we have the capacity, the resources, the space, things like that. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens at that end of event. And if I had to kind of break our strategy, at least in the near term, down to sort of, a catchphrase, if you will, it would be reduce and replace. So how do we reduce what we're using? How do we, bring in fuel efficiency into vehicles, right? How do we increase the miles per gallon? How do we get more on every trailer so that we have to ship we don't have to ship as many loads? And then we start looking at replacing. How do we move to hybrid vehicles, maybe natural gas vehicles, and eventually zero emission, electric or hydrogen fuel cell? Same with materials. How do we reduce the amount that we're using, and then how do we replace them with, in quotes, better materials, and even defining what those are. So then we looked at, within each scope, again, knowing what's driving our emissions allowed us to start looking at what are the various solutions within each of those areas. Now, I would say this is where the devil is in the details, right? There's a lot of work to do for us to really start digging into these and finding solutions. At least in the Freeman world, every site is different. So every one of our offices is different. Every one of our warehouses is different. Every venue is different. And so it's understanding what the availability is, understanding what the capabilities are, the resources. Every city that they're in some cities you may be able to easily recycle material. In other cities you may not, right? So then we have to start looking at how do we build those capacities. Within scope 1, again, our biggest impacts there are in the mobile assets. And that's our own vehicles. We do have a fleet of about 400 vehicles across the US, ranging from kind of cargo vans all the way up to most of our vehicles are Class 8s or in European, the Arctic trucks. And those bigger vehicles are the most difficult to transition. As you can imagine, they use a lot of fuel. You have to think about the availability of fueling infrastructure, et cetera. And so it's really going to be reaching out to the manufacturers of those vehicles, understanding the capabilities, understanding where they're at with infrastructure, things like that. We really are looking, in the scope 2 piece of it, talking to our landlords, understanding what they're doing in regards to these goals. Some of our landlords have very ambitious goals and so are very engaged and want to move forward. Others maybe not as much so. And so we're looking to see, how we can work with them. How do we work with the local utilities? What kinds of programs do they offer? Again, not only with access to renewable energy, but what kind of programs do they have to help with energy efficiency in the buildings? A lot of utilities will come and do a free energy audit to understand where is your energy being used, where are there opportunities, what are they doing to help support zero emission vehicles? Do they offer employee charging incentives? Do they offer charging programs for your commercial vehicles? All of those things. And lastly, scope 3, last but certainly not least, scope 3, which is again the biggest piece of our footprint, is engaging our suppliers in all of this, whether it be suppliers that we buy goods from, whether it be our third-party suppliers, whether it be our waste suppliers. So how do we really engage them in this process? And I think, you'll be surprised how many companies already have, pretty sophisticated programs and actually start to find a lot of benefit in working together to find some of these solutions. Like we found our carpet supplier is very engaged in this. We're super excited. Actually, come in June, we're going to be able to talk more about a really exciting development there. But that engagement with your suppliers is so important to help guide them and to make sure you're in line as far as how you're moving forward with these programs. Alex wanted me to talk about, the process we went through internally with our management to develop the roadmap. And Helen talked about this a little bit as well, that, she didn't realize the process would be as iterative. Sorry, that's a big word to say early in the morning. How iterative it would be and how long it would take. And I hope you take this diagram for what it is, because there weren't enough arrows and circles and back and forth for me to really get this on a slide. But this was as best as I could kind of visualize it. And we sort of had the sustainability team, in quotes, the experts in the middle, really reaching out, and it was back and forth between our team and all of the players that you see here on the diagram. And then, they were talking to each other and then coming back and things like that. And so important, throughout your program to make sure you're engaged with the business, make sure you're engaged with And when I say experts, I probably should have put the external. So I'm thinking whether it be your suppliers, whether it be NGOs that understand some of the options out there, and because there can be a lot of tentacles and a lot of unintended consequences to some of these solutions, right? We were talking the other day about a potential solution for some of our materials that don't have a good recycling stream or solution out there yet. If you're incinerating those materials, what does that look like from a sustainability perspective? What are some of the watch outs of that? And so I find reaching out to some of the NGOs to get their opinion of it. If you're incinerating, but you're replacing a fossil fuel, what does that look like? Johanna, maybe that'll be a topic of conversation when we meet. But just talking through some of these things, right? Talking to our truck manufacturers. We went on a tour of a truck manufacturing plant to really understand their process, understand what they're working on and what that timeline of what they're working on looks like. What are some of the challenges they're seeing? All of those things. And there was a lot of education in the process, right? I think sustainability is still pretty nebulous to a lot of people, right? And when you start really pushing this out into the business, there's a lot of complexities. Some of it is really simple and aligns well with the business. But there's other things that's like, why can't you just transition to a better material, right? That's sometimes can be the response you get, and the nuances of all of that, like defining what is sustainable is a big part of this. Like, why can't you just identify what materials are sustainable? Why can't you just do this? Like, so I would say really be prepared to educate and understand and listen. And again, if it's, I think, all of us are in business. And so it really does need to be sustainable to the business. And when I say fit the business, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to fit what is happening right now. We can change the process, but it has to be workable in the business. So, and that's where, really reaching out to the operators, the management, the leadership is so important. And like I said, be prepared. This is going to be a back and forth conversation, and sometimes around and around. But I think you will find that as people get on board and as they understand, you really ignite the innovation, passion, and progress through that engagement. So don't let this mess of conversations scare you from moving forward. This is what I talked about. I think something I've kind of put together over my years in sustainability of how to, again, simplify the process and prioritizing what you want to work on. A lot of us are very, very passionate about sustainability. We want to change the world tomorrow. We want to work on everything, but you just can't. And so I talk about the 4 I's. And so if you think about it, we talk through this about understanding what your impacts are across the board. So not only emissions, waste, water, biodiversity, whatever it is, understand what those impacts are. Then understand where you have influence, because there are going to be some of those impacts where at least you on your own are going to have a difficult time influencing, because you're just not a big enough player, or you may not have the resources to impact. Then out of all of those, what are you interested in changing? Again, there may be ones that are more important to your business, more important to your stakeholders, et cetera. So then being able to narrow down to what are you, what really makes sense for you to work on? And then what are the innovations in those areas? As an example, for us, for transportation, Our third-party transportation is a tough nut to crack because it is long haul, right? So it's not only having the availability of the trucks, it's having the availability of the fueling or charging infrastructure in between cities. And when you're talking sometimes about going hundreds of miles, and some of these trucks can only go to 200, maximum 300 miles at a stretch, that infrastructure becomes very important. So where are innovations available for you to actually make those impacts? Lastly, and this is the last page of our roadmap, is, this is a journey. This is going to continue to be refined. We're going to continue to add details. We're going to continue to add timelines and tactical goals, et cetera, as we move forward. So if you think back to the process I was just showing, right, innovation is going to continue to happen. Science is going to continue to change. Your business might change, right? Regulations may change what you're doing. So this is going to be a journey all the way up until 2050. And hopefully beyond either that, or we feel good about, the planet at that point, and the technologies and materials that we're using. But don't think this is going to be, you develop your roadmap and you're done. It's going to continue to change, and don't be afraid of those changes. If you have to go back and say, where we thought we were going to go just wasn't the right path, that's what you find out. And we continue to evolve. Just bring the passion that I know you all have to making a difference here and making an impact. Lastly, if you want, if you can scan these QR codes, they'll give you access to both our impact report and the roadmap. We're excited to work on this journey with you. And with that, Alex, I'll maybe turn it over for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Indeed, it's a journey, absolutely, and we've seen it also with the last webinar with RX as well. Helen described it as well, that indeed you need to come back and see again what you have done and how you can potentially improve it when moving into the future. Elizabeth, once again, thank you so much. I have, before we open up the questions, I have a question myself, and I've asked this Helen last time as well. You know that quite a lot of stakeholders of the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative are actually small and medium-sized companies, and I really this is something close to my heart to really go and understand especially their needs, because the capacity they have is maybe not as big as the large companies such as Freeman. I want to ask you, what would you give as a suggestion or as an advice how really a family-owned enterprise could go ahead about sustainability and designing their own roadmap? Is there something you could give as an advice?
Yeah, 100%. And if any of you read my bio, I've been with, one of the largest companies in the world. And then I've worked with startups with no resources. So I've been on both sides of that equation. Number one, I would say, your engagement in NZCE is a great start, right? We're working on a lot of resources that you can leverage. Education, there's a lot of NGOs out there that will help at no charge. So if you reach out, again, like I said, just reaching out to your suppliers, reaching out to some of the resources that are out there. And some of this is, like I say, there's a lot of science, but there's a lot of art. There's a lot of gut feel to it. And don't go down the road alone, right? Find where, work with your suppliers, work with your customers. Happy to, I could only even in a large company like Freeman, there's only so many resources, but please reach out to me. I can help kind of think through what you're working on and how we push forward. But I think you'll find as you go out, the UN has a lot of resources you can look at, things like that. So there are a lot of free resources to get you started. Hopefully, having access to our roadmap, RX's roadmap, other roadmaps that are out there will help guide you and start the process of you identifying where your own impacts are. And then, like I say, don't get overwhelmed by trying to change your entire business and every impact that you have at one time. Prioritize and figure out, where can you change? There's only so many boulders you can push uphill. So really look at where do you have that influence? Where do you feel like you can make a change? And focus on those and then start moving to the next one, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed by trying to change everything at one time.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I would like to open up for questions from our participants. Is there any questions? So if so, just don't be afraid to speak up and maybe introduce yourself, the company you're from, and of course your question.
Hi, Claire. This is Corey with Honeycomb Strategies. Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here this morning. I have a question. When you were talking with your vendor partners who maybe hadn't started this journey yet, were they then looking to you for a lot of help and assistance on how to start, or were you just pushing or giving them the resources that you just mentioned? Sometimes I find that when they haven't started, it becomes overwhelming, so you can't get information. And then they're also just reaching out to you for a lot of help.
Yeah, I would say, it's probably a little bit of both. We're maybe in an enviable position of that, it's sort of like an 80-20 role where, 80% of our spend is with 20% of the suppliers. And a lot of those are large, sophisticated suppliers that are under the same pressures as we are, right? So they're starting to look at these things. But I would say it's still, we still are engaging with them pretty deeply to understand what their impacts are and what their pathway is, and helping figure out how are we a piece of that, how can we help with that? How can we help guide the development of newer solutions? How do we help test new solutions, all of those things? So I would say it's definitely both. Even if the supplier is already engaged and has a pathway, there's still a need for pretty deep collaboration with them to move forward, to make sure that again, that the solutions fit what we need. Because these solutions, it's not only about hitting sustainability parameters, it's about performance, it's about quality, it's about durability, cost, all of those things. So yeah, I would say really regardless if they're engaged in the sustainability process or not, there's a lot of engagement with those suppliers. But where they haven't started, we try to help them with that and guide maybe where they can be looking.
Thanks, Corey, for the question. Anything else you would like to ask Elizabeth? Then use your chance now.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Helen. Great session today. I know like RX works very closely with Freeman, and we've been very grateful for your willingness to collaborate. So as we're a customer, you've talked a lot about kind of the supply chain. Are there things that you and perhaps other contractors might like to see coming from their customers that would help move the needle internally? I know that when
we in sustainability get pressure from our own customers, it's like hugely helpful for us to kind of get more internal buy-in. And I just wondered if there's kind of anything from the customer perspective.
That's a great question, Helen. I would say,
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
no, there's so many things that are coming to mind, and I'm trying to think of how to sort of focus in on them a little bit. And what's practical, right? Like, so one of the first things that came to mind was, you know, how do we, and maybe this is part of the NCCE effort as well, but how do we narrow in on some things that we can change together, right? All of our customers are kind of asking for different things in some ways. And so even, you know, kind of narrowing in on, from the contractor's perspective, what are the things that we can change together? Again, kind of prioritizing those, right? I think because we have on the customer side, and not trying to call out, there's probably other customers on here, so everybody please take this with a grain of salt. But we have, again, you can only change so many things at one time. And so sort of narrowing in on what those things are. Another thing we were talking about, and this is a tough nut to crack, and I'm not sure how much, you know, the individual customer has influence on this, but when we think about things like zero waste and having solutions for materials at the end of a show, a lot of that requires segregation, and that segregation can take time, and the time to move out is like getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so thinking together how we best do that, and that'll again be a collaboration with the venue. And so that collaboration with the venue probably is another area, Helen, now that I think about it, is because the venue, you're really the venue's customer, right? Versus we're their customer. And so for those three entities to come together to figure out some of these processes and things, you know, how do we transition to zero emission material handling equipment, right? That's going to start to become a real challenge, especially in California. And I know you all have, you know, business there, things like that. So maybe that piece of it would be a good area of how the three of us being venues, contractors, show organizers, come together to influence what happens there.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
For sure. You know, we're happy to work with you on anything, Helen.
Well, we have some great collaboration, so yeah, really, and looking forward to the future of that collaboration as well.
Absolutely, us too. Like I said, it's not only critical, I think it's absolutely necessary for us all to work together.
Indeed. So this is what the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative is about as a whole, right? We all come together to tackle this topic of sustainability and climate change collectively. That's why I'm always saying that we need more stakeholders really from around the world to be part of it. But is there any other question to Elizabeth? I don't see anyone. Well, then I think I would say on behalf of all of us, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your contribution. As I said, we will upload this on the Net Zero Carbon Events YouTube channel, and we'll send it around within the next couple of days, so you can share it with your colleagues or with your own networks, so of course with the suppliers. so that they too might consider joining Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative and work together with us. As you know, we have started the phase of implementation, and if any of you guys would like to be part of any of the projects which we have circulated, just drop us a line. We will be very happy to include you. There is still room to work together with us on different aspects, so very welcome all. As I said, we will also send out the information about the next webinars. So watch out the space on our social media channels, but also, of course, via email. And once again, thank you so much for joining. And Elizabeth, one more time, kudos to you, and looking forward to further collaboration.
Absolutely. Thank you. Safe travels, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.